My name is Dr. Barlow, and I'm Dean of the Graduate School. And I really appreciate you taking time out on this icy cold Thursday to learn a little bit more about the requirements that the graduate school has related to the thesis and dissertation. So let me get going. There we go. So our purpose today will be to just bring overall awareness to some of our procedures and processes that we have in place. And I want to give particular attention in three areas. One will be general procedural information regarding final submission. I also want to talk about some common mistakes, and my hope is that by sharing these proactively, that you'll learn from them and avoid them. And then also, I'll talk briefly just about what resources we have to support your success as a student writing a thesis or a dissertation. Before we get much further into this, I do want to take a poll to see who all's in the audience with me today. So let me launch this poll. So you should see the poll now. And basically, I'm asking you sort of at what stage do you see yourself in working on your. Before we get much further into this, I do want to take a poll to see who all's in the audience with me today. So let me launch this poll. So you should see the poll now. And basically, I'm asking you sort of at what stage do you see yourself in working on your thesis or dissertation? And then alternatively, are you a faculty member? So I'll give you all just a moment to respond. Got about half of you that have responded, so a few more seconds. Okay, and so let me close the poll. And I'll share the results just so that you can see. We've got one person who's at the very early stage, and so there will be some information for you. There are some that are sort of in the middle where you're working around your proposal or you're beginning the process of writing your thesis. And then we have quite a few that are later in this process, maybe even graduating like this semester, which is really exciting. And it's also nice to have faculty members here. So they're here to show their support, and I really appreciate that. So let me stop sharing and close this poll. Well, there it is. And I'll advance the slide. So the way I'm going to present the information this afternoon is I'm imagining the process of writing or completing a thesis or a dissertation in three different stages. And so it's helpful to know how many folks in the audience kind of feel in those different stages. And then afterwards, I'll talk a little bit about continuous enrollment, which applies across all of the stages. So to get started, I'll focus on the early stage. And again, this is where you're at the very beginning. So you are, you've made the decision to do a thesis or a dissertation. And there's really two forms that come into play in this early stage. One is this notice of intent to complete a thesis form. So just to share a little bit of information about that, this form is actually only needed if you're in a program where a thesis is optional. So for example, if you're in a doctoral program, we know you're going to do a dissertation, so you would not complete this form. If you're in a program that requires a thesis, we know you're going to do it, so you would not need to complete this form. But any program where it's an option, the sooner you let us know that you plan to do this, the better. And this is the form that you would submit to let the graduate school know. Again, when do you do this? As soon as you make that decision. And this form, as well as all of our forms, are on our graduate school page. And we have a page on our site that's labeled forms, and you'll see it there. But we also have a thesis and dissertation page. And later in this presentation, I'll show you that, and you'll see where the forms are as well. So that's the notice of intent form. The other form that comes into play early in this process is the committee form. So the committee form, all students who are completing a thesis or a dissertation submit the committee form. This is a form that lists each of the faculty members that will serve on your committee, and it identifies the chair. It requires the signatures of your department chair and your college dean, as well as myself. So it comes to the graduate school. And, again, the earlier you can submit that, the better. But definitely, if you haven't done it yet, it would be in that first semester that you enroll in thesis or dissertation hours. And I will say this is one of the things that we find ourselves waiting on students to get to us. And a lot of times students end up with a hold and they cannot register until they've gotten this form to us. So again, as soon as you can take care of it, please do. If you run into problems, let us know and we'll work with you around registering if you have a hold and so forth. And like the other form, this one's on our website under forms. Okay. So now I want to talk about mid-stage. And so again, this is sort of, you're working on the proposal through, perhaps you've collected your data and you are beginning to think about writing your thesis or dissertation. So I do want to bring out a couple of points related to each of these stages or each of these parts of the stage. When it comes to writing your proposal, the graduate school itself does not have guidelines around writing a proposal. So the guidelines that you as a student need to follow related to your proposed research, your proposed work, are going to be the program guidelines. So talk to your chair, your thesis or dissertation chair. Make sure you have those program goal guidelines and be sure to adhere to those. Typically, if this is like a traditional scientific research type proposal, you'll see an introduction, a literature review, a methodology. But we know that some programs don't have that typical structure. And so creative writing, for example, or English might look different, and that's okay. You just make sure you adhere to your program guidelines. One thing I do want to point out is that in the proposal, you're talking about what you're going to do, what you will do. And so therefore you will be using future tense in the proposal. In contrast, when you're actually writing the thesis or dissertation, you will also be following your program guidelines, but now the graduate school has guidelines. And it's important to have those in front of you and help use them to help you format and get your plan set, laid out for preparing your document, because it's better to do that on the front end than wait till the end and then try to fix everything. So make sure that you take a look at the graduate school guidelines as you start putting your thesis or dissertation together. We have different types, and the traditional versus the alternative format. The traditional format would be the one that has that same organization as you see over there. It's got an introduction, it has a literature review, there's probably methodology and results, and then discussion and conclusion. So it has that kind of traditional format, 5 chapters, sometimes 6. But then there are alternative formats, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But I do want to mention that this product typically should be written in past tense. So whereas your proposal talked about what you would be doing, the thesis or dissertation talks about what you did. So it's past tense. Now, to talk a little bit more, before we get further, the other piece to look at is your style guide. So in my field of mathematics education, we use APA. So my style guide is APA. Your discipline may use Chicago style or MLA. I'm not sure, but whatever style guide is, you need to take a look at it. Sometimes people say, well, we go by this certain journal and use a journal's guidelines. That's fine, but find out what your style guide is and then use it so that you are producing a quality piece of work that adheres to those guidelines. Now to talk about our alternative or non-traditional formats. So in terms of non-traditional formats, so we had the traditional, and I mentioned that, but then we have non-traditional that don't fit in there. There's lots of different programs that have non-traditional. I listed the MFA in film and the MFA in creative writing just because those came to the top of my head first, but there are other programs as well. In contrast, we have what's called an alternative format. And the alternative format sometimes is referred to as a manuscript style or a manuscript format, where the dissertation or the thesis is made up of manuscripts that would be submitted to a journal. For those that fall under this first category it's a different format and it's very unique to the discipline. Sometimes there's information in the graduate school guideline, but really follow the program guidelines on that. And your chair, your dissertation chair or your thesis chair, will be the one who helps you to come to understand those guidelines. In terms of the alternative format, we have new graduate school guidelines. We had some before, they weren't the best. About a year ago, a group of faculty came together, and so through those discussions, we developed new guidelines from the graduate school that are related to the alternative format. So I want to give you just kind of a glimpse of the alternative format. And again, this is based on this idea of writing manuscripts. So if this pertains to you, you can think about it like this. Some programs will say, okay, you need to write one manuscript. Some might say two, others might say three. That part is really up to the program. But the example I'm doing, I want you to think of it as there's two manuscripts that are part of your research. These manuscripts actually become chapters in your thesis or dissertation. And so I've changed their label now to be chapters 2 and 3. And of course, you might be going, well, wait a minute, what happened to chapter 1? And that's part of our guidelines, and that chapter 1 should be an introduction to the dissertation or to the whole thesis that sets out like what do I expect to read as I read through this whole product. And then you'll notice I've got chapter 4 here as a conclusion. So this is a conclusion to the thesis or the dissertation. So those two chapters sort of bookend the manuscripts. If you had a third manuscript, obviously it would be chapter 4, and the conclusion would be chapter 5. But these two bookends give an overview and then like a reflection on to see how the different manuscripts tie together to represent your work. In addition to this, there's always the front matter. And the front matter is a term that's used to describe like the title page, the signature pages, the abstract, the table of contents, things like that. That front matter is still there in an alternative format. And then we also have our references and appendices, just like in a regular any format for thesis or dissertation. I will say that typically, if you're doing a manuscript, whatever references or appendices go with the manuscript are included with it in that stage. So in other words, and I'm going to point now, if you have references for chapter 2, and I suspect you would, they would appear right here at the end of chapter 2, rather than being dumped over here in the references for the whole thing, okay? So that gives you sort of a visual of what it means to write an alternative format. So some questions that I get related to this often are, should I have an alternative format or a traditional format for my thesis or dissertation? And so some things to think about within that regard. Look at your program guidelines. It could be that a program requires one or the other. And so that's one place you would want to look. You also want to talk with your thesis or dissertation chair. They will have ideas about whether or not your work fits within the alternative or traditional, or they'll have conversations with you about the advantages of one over the other. So your chair is a resource for answering that question. Also, the design of your study. I've worked with some students who, they design their study and it's so nicely fit into an alternative format. But then I've seen other students who have a study that when they try to put it into an alternative format, it's not working because, well, I won't go into why, but it's not working. So sometimes the design of your study will influence that decision as well. So now I'm going to go to the final stage. And as I'm moving into the final stage, I'm remembering that I forgot to say, if you all put questions in the Q&A, I will try to answer those when I get finished in just a moment. So to the final stage. So this is the person who's getting ready to defend and probably graduate. So you are writing intensely, trying to get these drafts to your chair and to your committee and so forth. So in the final stage, which again, I've labeled final semester now. This is the process that you go through. You have to apply to graduate. And the application for graduation it has nothing to do with the commencement ceremony, and it has everything to do with conferring your degree. So if you want to receive your degree, and we all do, then you'll have to apply to graduate in that final semester. You'll send out a notice of defense, or your chair will send out a notice of defense. Your committee will have the draft at that point, so you give them about 2 weeks to read it and be ready for that defense. Then you have the defense. You get up there, and again, your chair is your one that's going to help you to know what's expected in that defense. Afterwards, you make your final revisions that the committee asks for, and then you send it into ProQuest. And the steps for submitting to ProQuest are in the graduate school's guidelines. When it gets into ProQuest, I go in and look at it, and I'll send you, it usually takes a couple of going back and forth via email, requested revisions. And as soon as you make the revisions that I've asked for, and we're all on the same page with it, I'll then give you approval. And once you receive approval, you submit a final copy to the graduate school. Now, the deadlines for this, and these deadlines are on our website. And again, I'll show you where that is in just a minute. But application for graduation was February 9th, which was 2 days ago. If you're planning to graduate this semester and you missed that deadline, that's okay. Please just submit it today and pay the graduation fee and everything will be fine. The notice of defense, you should notify the graduate school, and you should notify your college dean and probably your department chair too, but definitely your college dean, and include with that the draft of your thesis or dissertation. And I'm going to tell you that this is actually fairly new because we did away with the form last semester. And so deans have asked that at the time that the defense is announced, that they receive a copy of the draft so that if they have comments, they can provide those. The deadline for completing your defense is April 9th. Then a week later, the 16th, is the deadline for submitting your final committee-approved, chair-approved draft into ProQuest. And then you'll work with me via email for a couple of weeks, and we'll need a hard copy submitted to the graduate school by May 3rd. At any point in this, if you see that, it's April the 16th and you need one more day, please just reach out to us and we'll be, I'm happy to give you an extra day. I do have people who start wanting like 2 or 3 extra weeks, and that I can't do, but an extra day or so, we can definitely manage that. So just have a conversation with your chair and then make the request for that extension. So now I will talk about some of the common corrections that I have to ask for during that stage. And I've broken it out into these corrections that are needed for all formats. So regardless of what type you're writing, these are some things that I typically have to ask. And then I'll have some that are particular to the alternative format. So in general, and I emphasized this before, and this is why a lot of times one of the corrections I ask students to make is to write about their study in the past tense. And what really happens is the students have used their proposal as part of their dissertation, and then they've been inconsistent about going back through that and putting it all in past tense. So just be really careful about that, because it's really odd to read a report of a project and here, it's at the end and it says something like, I will investigate. And you're like, no, you've already investigated. So just pay attention to use of tense. Another common requested correction is to be sure to include your IRB or your ICOOK approval letter. Now, not every study requires those. So you should know about that early on because that's the beginning of the stage, beginning of the process part is getting those approvals. But if you have to have that approval, you do include your letter of approval as an appendix. You do not have to include everything. So for example, if you have IRB approval, you do not have to include the informed consent. You do not have to include the different announcements and things that you give to your potential participants. Just the approval letter is needed. Another issue that's very common is with regard to the front matter. And I mentioned that term a moment ago, and I talked about how it's the title page, et cetera, that's in the front leading up to the table of contents. And I spend a lot of time at the end trying to help students get that corrected. But if you look at the graduate school guidelines to begin with, then you're going to be better positioned to have that correct on the front end, and then it'll make the issues at the end much smoother. So pay attention to the information that you have about front matter. And that's also something that I would encourage faculty to support their students in knowing about the front matter and getting that done correctly. Another issue that we run into is permission to reprint figures. In this day and age, it is so easy to just take your fingers on the keyboard and do a quick screenshot of some image or scan something and drop it into a document. But this document that you're preparing, it will be published. And so any figures that you take from somewhere else, you have to have permission to reprint. So make sure that if you have figures that you've taken from somewhere, that you have permission to reprint, and that you indicate that in the figure caption that it was reprinted with permission. And if you have more questions about that, I would be happy to try to help you when that time comes. Another piece that often happens is students will submit their final draft into ProQuest and they're missing committee signatures. So the version that goes into ProQuest is the final version, and that means you have to have committee signatures in that digital version. So what's going to happen is you're either using digital signatures or using some kind of scanned copy of signatures, and you may end up merging PDFs. But just know that if you submit it and the signatures are not there, I'm sending it right back and saying you need the signatures. So go ahead and make sure you have those. Another issue is the left margin has to be 1.5 inches, and that's because your copies actually are bound into a book and then maintained in the library. So make sure your left margin is 1.5 inches. I don't know how many more of these I've got. It can't be too many. The date on the title page should be the month and year of graduation. So you may defend in March 2021, but your date on the front page will be May 2021 because that's your month and year of graduation. That's a common mistake. And then we always have issues with page numbers. The front matter has lower Roman numerals. The rest of the text, it starts over with page 1, and the font should match. Whatever the text font is, should match the page number font. So again, common errors. My goal is to point this out now, so that faculty might begin looking for these, but then also students are aware and can get these done correctly on the front end. A few things related to alternative format. So one of the issues that I often see is that there will be multiple manuscripts, so people will have multiple abstracts. But you have to think of the thesis or the dissertation as one document. So therefore it has one abstract that's up in the front matter, okay? Similarly, a lot of times students will want to include their title pages with their manuscripts. But again, this is one document. It has one title page on the front. That's the only one you need. And then third, if you have, for example, 2 manuscripts and they both have a table 1, then you need a different way to number your tables because you can't have 2 table 1s in this one document. So it could be that this one is table 2.1 because it's chapter 2, table 1, and this one might be 3.1 because it's chapter 3, table 1. However you work that out is fine, but you can't have like 2 table 1. So that's another common mistake in the alternative format. And then finally, some of our programs in the past have had like a supplementary literature review or a supplementary methods or supplementary results, and they put those in the appendices. But based on the new guidelines that we have, those should actually just be chapters in the thesis or in the dissertation, so that you don't see like a huge 50-page appendix of literature. That would be perhaps a chapter 2. That's a literature review. It doesn't have to have been submitted as a manuscript to be a chapter. You would just explain that in the introduction to your thesis or dissertation. So make sure if you have those supplementary pieces rather than an appendix, they show up as a chapter. Okay. And then I have one huge tip, and that is to seek editorial support. I encourage you to ask a friend to read your work, but not just any friend, right? You need someone who's going to read it carefully and give you feedback in terms of grammar and spelling and your style guide, if you've got folks that can work with you on your style guide. Utilize the CWC. So we have the Center for Writing and Communication on campus. Excuse me, ask for help with them to make sure you've got things written correctly. And then depending on your skill set, hire an editor. I've always required my students to hire an editor. And even though I had, as a chair, did a lot of, provided a lot of support in terms of editing. But this is a piece that's going out and it's going to represent you forever. It's going to represent the university. So it's worth the time to make sure that it's written well. So seek editorial support. Your committee will provide some of that, but I would encourage you to also find a friend, get in touch with the Writing Center, and hire an editor if need be. So finally, in terms of continuous enrollment, I did want to mention that. And basically our policy is that once you enroll in a minimum of an hour in thesis or dissertation, that from that point forward, you are registering for thesis or dissertation hours every semester, fall, spring, and summer. The idea is that once you start, we want you continuously working on it, enrolling in it, using the university resources, et cetera, and therefore you should be enrolled so that you have access to those resources. It is best practice to keep working on this even through the summer. So that's our continuous enrollment policy. And if for some reason you run into issues with that, then please contact me so that we can have a discussion about that. What you don't want to do is pretend like it doesn't exist and not register, because then we're just going to keep contacting you about get registered. So we should have a conversation if something's going on, okay? So last, I do want to show you some of the resources that we have on our graduate school page. So this is a screenshot of the graduate school web page, and I assume you can maneuver to find us. But if you click on current students, and then you scroll down to the bottom of that list, it says thesis and dissertation. And so if you go to that page, this is a chart that's on that page. And right here, these are the dates that were mentioned earlier. But if you're not graduating this semester, if you're graduating summer, you can see the summer dates. Where'd my cursor go? Summer dates are already there. Fall dates are there. Those are not the fall dates. Okay, I will get that corrected tomorrow so that the fall dates are there. And then we update it and try to keep 3 semesters there. Okay, so that's a resource to know your timelines. Also on the same page, there is some information about thesis and dissertation and some of the responsibilities. Most of this is probably, they're all things I've said in this presentation, so none of this would be new to you, but know that this is there with links to the different pieces. But then also we have at the bottom of this page a listing of the different forms, and they're there, they're digital. So if you download the form, they will allow for digital signatures, which is very helpful these days. You'll notice, I'll point out a couple of things. One, we used to have what we call a routing form, and it's no longer required. So if your chair or you hear somebody talking about, oh, have you done your routing form? Then you can say, oh, that's not required anymore. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. And then the other thing I'll point out is the front matter template right down here. That is a Word document that if you download it, it is already formatted with the page numbers, etc. For the front matter, and then it has like page 1 for the main text. And so you could actually just go in and fill in your stuff and keep going. So if Word is not your friend, or you're just not as familiar with how to do section breaks and different page numbers and all that kind of stuff, this front matter template is there to potentially help you through that process. So with that, I'm at the end of my information, and I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see questions and things that we have. Let's see, we've got a couple of things in the chat. And then so let me answer the chat questions and then I'll go to Q&A. So one question in the chat, is this presentation available for us to save? So yes, the presentation itself will be put on our YouTube channel. And so once we have that, then we'll let you all know that that's there. And then I will also take this presentation and email it to those of you that are here. Okay. So that's that. Another question, where do you want the literature review in the alternate format? You include in the intro or the separate chapter? So if your students, so the question is about a literature review in an alternative format. So if your students are doing, you know, like a full-blown literature review, that should be a chapter. So you might have chapter 1 that's just an introduction to the overall document and describes the different chapters that we're going to see. And then chapter 2 might be that literature review. And then chapter 3 could be your manuscript, whatever that manuscript's going to be, and so forth. If your literature is very brief and you don't see it like making up a whole chapter, it could be in the introduction. So however you, as the student and faculty member, this question came from a faculty member, that however the chair wants to see it is fine. But the way I've envisioned it, what I'm asking for at a minimum is an introductory chapter and a conclusion chapter that bookend whatever those contents are of your dissertation, if you're using that alternative format. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. So here's a tiny detail question. I like those. The page numbers should be the same font. Should it also be the same font size? Yes. So if you're writing in Times New Roman size 12, then that's what the page numbers should be. Let's see, here's oh, this is a good one. The student uses up all dissertation hours and they're not ready to defend. How is it handled? Yeah, you keep registering for additional dissertation or thesis hours. So your program, let's say you're in a PhD program and it has, I don't know, let's say 12 hours that are for dissertation. So let's say you've used all 12 and you haven't finished yet. Then you register again, and it may be for 1 hour, it may be for 3 hours, just however many, whatever is reflective of the work you're doing. And that means you'll have additional hours, but they don't apply to your degree. So your degree hours, the 12 is done, but you still have to register so that you have access to the resources of the university, and that includes your faculty members. So you continue to register, okay? If you run into issues with that, because for some reason there is a cap of like 18 hours for some of these courses, you just contact the graduate school and we'll get that fixed so that you can continue to register. And that's not uncommon, right? Particularly at a PhD level where life happens, things take a little bit longer than you thought. So you just keep registering. That's a good question. Okay, let's see what else I have. So this question is, what are thesis hours and what are they accomplishing? So just like you register for a class, when it comes to working on your thesis, you register for a class that's called Thesis, or it may be called Thesis Hours. It's probably just called Thesis. Those are variable credit. And so typically students register for like 1 hour or 3 hours or 6 hours, just depending on how much work they're doing. And if you're in a program that requires a thesis, then a certain number of your hours in your degree plan are expected to be in that course, okay? And so then the second part of this, what are they accomplishing? Well, one, they're getting you credit for doing your thesis or your dissertation. But two, they're giving you access to the resources that you need, like the library, like the faculty, like the CWC, et cetera, that you need to be able to successfully complete your thesis. So that's part of it. It's like you're paying tuition so that you have access to the resources to do the work that you need to do. Good question. So this next question, what are my thoughts on additional lit review, given a review of literature is likely redundant to the lit review of the articles in an alternative format? That is up to the program. So the idea here is that some programs will require, like, here's your introductory chapter. Here's a like full-blown lit review. Maybe it's 100 pages long. And then you have a manuscript, maybe another manuscript. And so what happens is the lit review in this 100 pages it gets repeated in this manuscript and in this manuscript because it was related to those two. So in some ways, you know, somebody might argue, but I did that for my proposal. I want it in there. Okay. And some universities require that. They'll say your proposal has to be that full-blown lit review, and the first 3 chapters of your dissertation are going to be that proposal. But if you have the flexibility to say, we don't want that, and the you and that is the faculty members of the program, not necessarily the students. If you say, we think it would be redundant, you've done X, Y, and Z to demonstrate that you know your literature, then it would be up to the program to say, we don't see the point in having a 100-page lit review. Let's just jump right in and do manuscripts, right? In between the 2 bookend chapters of intro and conclusion. So I see it as pros and cons. But again, that's up to a program. And I would be happy to sit down with a program group of faculty to listen and hear and just kind of share some perspective from different places that would help them to make that decision. Good question. All right, let me go to the Q&A now. Notice of defense. So is an email sufficient? I think so. I don't think we have any kind of form for that. So if you're emailing the graduate school, you can email our general email, or you can email Jennifer Bell because she's the one that keeps up with that. But yeah, to my knowledge, that is sufficient for a notice of defense. And if it's a dissertation defense, I will then take that information and push it out to graduate faculty and push it out through the UCA Inform to the larger community. Next question, can you apply to graduate in summer 1? So, summer graduation is just summer graduation, and the graduation date is usually August the something, like 7th, or, it's around that first weekend in August. And so we don't have the flexibility to have different terms, have different graduation dates. Okay. Next question. Is the student responsible for binding, or will UCA bind them after final approval? So the UCA does it. So UCA students bring us the hard copy. Again, it's got that 1.5-inch margin. It's printed on nice paper. It's printed on one side. Don't do it double-sided. And all this is in the thesis dissertation guide, okay? But you bring it to us on paper, and then we give it to the library, and they get it bound. Now, and I will tell you all this, that if you want to order copies for yourself or your committee, you can do that through ProQuest. So when you submit to ProQuest, you have the option of purchasing your thesis or dissertation, and the price for that is going to vary. I'm not really sure. I talked to somebody yesterday who had ordered one, and she paid like $60 for one copy of her dissertation. Alternatively, if you want to bring a hard copy, so you've already printed it out, to the library, and you pay them, the library, to do it, they'll charge you $12. That's the current price for binding at the library. So those are your 2 options that you have. There are some other online things, companies that'll do it for you, but I think those are probably your best 2. You've got ProQuest that costs more, but it's a whole lot easier, right? It's less effort on your part. Or if you are in the Conway area and can get to the library, take them a copy that you've printed out and pay them $12, and they'll get it bound for you. Okay. Next question. In terms of hiring an editor, is there a resource for finding reputable editors, or should we work with our respective chairs? That is a tough question. I think that some of the programs, particularly, I know Leadership Studies was working on developing kind of their in-house list of some people that would be appropriate. We've run into issues, though, because we've had some cases where a student paid a professional editor, and then it came back and it didn't reflect the amount of money they had paid for it. Like, there was just way too many errors in there. And so I'm really leery of like you won't hear the graduate school make a recommendation that says, here, use this person. With that said, I mean, there are online services where you upload your document and then they do the work and send it back to you. And I don't know how they are, but you probably could read more about those. And usually if you have an online business, like, then you're going to have like the people who give it the 4 stars or the 1 star. And so you get kind of those ratings to see how that's going. So that's not a really good answer, but I hope that as more programs hire editors or are looking for editors, that they'll begin to also build a list of folks that are useful in that sense. Let's see. Okay, so here's this next question. It says, I will defend my MFA thesis next month, but they have one more class. Do they have to keep enrolling in thesis in terms of continuous enrollment? And the answer to that is no. You've completed the thesis, and so you're good there. So the only thing you would have to register this summer would be the additional class. Okay. Next question. Are there residency requirements for the doctoral programs at UCA? So the graduate school has what they call, the graduate school has what we call a residency requirement, which is that you have 24 hours taken in your program at UCA. Outside of that, some programs may have additional residency requirements. You would just have to check with the program. So the best person to answer that question would be the program coordinator. Okay, let's see. Yes, so this is a long question. So in general, sorry, I just bumped my computer. Okay, so in terms of the alternative format, this requirement that there be like this short introductory chapter and this final conclusion chapter, that is a new requirement. So a faculty member 3 months ago might have said, no, chapter 1's going to be your manuscript, chapter 2 is going to be your manuscript. And what I'm saying now is chapter 1's going to be that brief introduction to the document, and your first manuscript would be chapter 2. So yes, adding just a little bit. The first chapter, it may be 2 pages, 3, I don't know, whatever it takes for you to describe like the overall piece of work. Okay. If that didn't answer your question, please email me separately and we'll have more talk. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so this question is, they're in creative writing, they're doing a book, they want to format their book as a 6x9. Should the work turned in for the thesis use a standard 8x11? Yes, it should use a standard 8x11. That's because it's going to be bound as a book in the library. So yeah, we're asking you to use that 8x11 format with that 1.5-inch left-hand margin, okay? Does UCA have doctoral programs that are totally online? Do you think UCA will increase the number of doctoral programs that are primarily online? Okay, let me picture my doctoral programs in my head. So right now, I would say we have doctoral programs that are moving into maybe including some online components, but they're not completely online. However, we have one right now that's moving through the approval process to be completely online. That's the Leadership Studies PhD. And it is a total revamping of that program, and it will become totally online. I know that's true. I'm thinking about the other PhD programs. And I think they are primarily face-to-face, but I know like the physical therapy, they've worked with people who were at a distance, trying to support them in their program. Yeah, I think that's accurate. So for the most part, face-to-face, trying to perhaps become more hybrid or include more online components. But the PhD in Leadership Studies is moving to being completely online if it gets approval. Let's see, do you not graduate if your thesis is rejected? That is correct. If you have chosen the thesis or if the thesis is required, that's a degree requirement. And so if it's rejected, then you would not graduate. However, let me say that our faculty at UCA are not going to let you get to the end and have it be rejected. So they're going to work with you on the front end, and it may be painful sometimes. But they're going to work with you to design a really great project. They're going to help you to get it written. They're going to support you through that process of writing and successfully defending so that by the time it gets to the end, we would not reject it at the end. We'll provide some guidance. We may ask for some revisions, but an overall rejection, no. But if you're on the front end and you put in some ideas, if you don't listen to what they tell you, and you put something out there and they're like, we're not taking that, then your committee will not approve it. But again, that happens on the front end where you've still got a lot of time to work and revise and make it stronger so that the committee will approve it. Okay. Let's see. Can that be mailed for out-of-state or distance students? Yes, I'm assuming we're talking about the hard copy there, and we do allow students to mail that in, particularly nowadays where not everybody's around Conway. So when you get the email that says, congratulations, your dissertation has been approved in ProQuest, I also provide information about here's how to get us the hard copy, and it includes like dropping it off, but then also snail mailing it in. So I'll give you the address for that. If you're planning on graduating in the summer, when is the deadline to apply to graduate? It's early June. I'd have to go back on that website to look at the date, but it's going to be early June. But you can go to our website, and remember I showed you that table and that column, it should be on there. Okay. And I think what's my last question? Can I use fonts other than Times New Roman? Well, you know, sort of, maybe. Like we can't go crazy here, right? And have some swirly stuff, but there are several professional looking fonts that would be appropriate. Some students have used Arial. Of course, I've seen Times New Roman. I've seen Courier, maybe. The MFA film people in their scripts, they tend to use something else. I'm not sure what it is. They use something else. So there are others that you can use, you know, within reason, obviously. These are really great questions. Let me just go back over here real quick to the chat to see if I've got some additional questions that have popped up. Yeah, the statement about the issues with paid editors, like we've had some issues. I'm wondering about those online opportunities, if that might be an interest. Yeah. Well, now I'm here, I'm reading that maybe that's not good either. Yeah, and then I've got a reminder that yes, Leadership Studies program will be 100% online once approved. Okay, is there a deadline to sending my thesis title and the date of my defense to the graduate school? Jennifer Bell will communicate with students regarding when to get the thesis or dissertation title to us. That is, the deadline for that is determined by when we have to get information for the program, right? So it goes into the commencement ceremony program. And so she'll communicate that deadline. I'm not sure when that is. And then the date of the defense, I mean, we just need to know as soon as it is, as soon as you know. And the deadline for having the defense I gave a few minutes ago, so I don't remember what that was. These are all great questions, and I appreciate, again, you all being here and asking your questions. If a question has gone unanswered, or if I answered a question and you're thinking, wow, I have more questions now, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is abarlow5, number 5, at uca.edu. And if I don't have the answer for you, I will get the answer for you. Congratulations, though, on making it to this point where you're thinking about a thesis, or perhaps you're about to defend and graduate. That's awesome. And know that we're here to help. So again, this is recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel. I'll send the presentation out to those of you that are here so that you have that. And as more questions come up, please know that I'm a resource, and the graduate school is a resource to help you. Okay. Y'all have a great afternoon and stay safe in this icy cold weather that we have. Okay. Bye-bye.